Hello and welcome to Triage, timely conversations for healthcare professionals, a podcast created and produced by K&L Gates. Each episode is designed to highlight important developments in health law and analyze the impact on our clients and friends of the firm. We hope you enjoy this podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Triage. My name is Gabe Scott, and I'm a healthcare partner in K&L Gates' healthcare and FDA practice. Today, we're discussing two significant HIPAA proposed rulemakings, proposed updates to the HIPAA Security Rule, as well as proposed modifications to the HIPAA Privacy Rule. Together, these proposals reflect HHS's efforts to modernize HIPAA, both strengthening cybersecurity protections for electronic protected health information, as well as improving how health information can be accessed and shared to support a variety of healthcare-related activities, including care coordination, patient and family member access, while still maintaining core privacy safeguards. We're going to walk through the sort of the key policy changes here, sort of rationale for those changes, and what stakeholders should watch for as the rulemaking processes move forward. To do this, I'm joined by two attorneys, Sarah Carlins, who is of counsel in our Pittsburgh office, and Myia Pretty, who is an associate in the firm's Research Triangle Park office. Welcome to you both, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gabe.
Thanks.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So, Sarah, let's start with you by discussing the security rule, which, as our listeners know, aims to protect the confidentiality of electronic PHI by implementing sort of various required safeguards, technical, physical, administrative, etc., to shield information from unauthorized access, use, or disclosure. So in terms of the proposals here, what is HHS proposing here in practical terms in regard to the security rule?
Well, in practical terms, it's easy. The proposed changes to the security rule are essentially aimed at strengthening cybersecurity protections for EPHI, and it would include new requirements as well as more stringent controls on requirements that are already there.
Perfect. So why did HHS decide that this was the right time to revisit the security rule?
Well, the healthcare industry, as well as many others, has suffered a great increase in cybersecurity threats and attacks. We're all aware in the news of, ransomware and hacking, and, maybe that's even affected us personally. And OCR, in its notice of proposed rulemaking fact sheet, said that it seeks to strengthen cybersecurity by updating the security rule standards to better address ever-increasing cybersecurity threats to the healthcare sector. And so it's really meant to address today's cybersecurity challenges.
Thanks, Sarah. So, Myia, Sarah talked about sort of a number of the changes. What's the biggest, sort of practical change for covered entities and business associates here?
Yes, thanks, Gabe. The most practical problem that HHS is trying to fix with this proposal is that, the security rule is outdated. And so the security rule is making this rule more specific and operational. So instead of just telling people that you need to implement a risk analysis, they're telling you how they want you to actually go about implementing that risk analysis by putting in place certain timeframes, kind of giving you a little bit more guidance in regards to how to go about achieving those things. So I would say that would probably be the biggest thing is again, making the security rule more specific and more operational for covered entities and business associates, assuming with the hope that it makes it easier to comply with the security rule.
And so, Sarah, when we think about, how these proposals will impact business associates and covered entities, from a risk analysis standpoint, what changes are you seeing?
So with regard to the risk analysis that an entity is going to have to do, it's going to make it more explicit and more detailed. And that's going to be something that will apply to both covered entities and business associates. And so business associates may not have had that requirement before. So a lot of people are going to have to be aware of what they have to do to sort of up their game as far as risk analysis goes.
Maya, before we turn our discussion to the privacy rule proposed changes, if this security rule proposal is finalized as it's been proposed, how soon would compliance obligations begin?
The rule would become effective 60 days after the final rule is published, and the compliance deadline would be 180 days. Also, HHS has gave an extension to covered entities who have business associate agreements to give them more time to go back and review those to make sure that they can be in compliance with the rule itself as well.
Great. So turning now to the HIPAA Privacy Rule, which, as our listeners know, sort of aims to ensure the confidentiality of protected health information by imposing requirements on how it's used and disclosed. The proposal here that OCR has made is several years old, right? It was made several years ago, was never finalized, and now OCR is indicating it may be finalized this year. Sarah, can you give us a brief overview of what those changes might be and sort of what the rationale is behind them?
The main goal is really to make the HIPAA privacy rule work better in a practical sense in everyday operations for healthcare providers and patients. And this would be done in effectively sort of three ways. One, by improving health information sharing among providers. Number two, to help individuals empower themselves with regard to their own healthcare, which would include, for example, easier and better access to their own medical records. And finally, to reduce compliance burdens on providers that really HHS has determined are unnecessary.
Maya, Sarah just mentioned one of the sort of most talked about parts of the proposal involves patient access. What specifically would change there?
Yes. So the proposal outlined a number of things that could change for patient access rights. I'll list a few here. One of them being the proposal would strengthen the right for individuals to inspect their PHI in person. So this would allow patients to take pictures real time of like their X-ray images, take notes, things like that. The other thing that it would do is shorten the response time for covered entities to respond to these requests. So right now the response time is 30, and it would shorten that time to 15 days. And then as Sarah had mentioned previously, it would reduce admin burdens. One of those would be such as getting, covered entities will no longer be required to have a patient's right of access request notarized before approving it. And then just a couple of other things to mention as well that the proposal changes is the importance for care coordination. So it removes privacy barriers that may impede this coordinated value-based care that the rule is seeking to enhance, and clarifying a covered entity's ability to disclose PHI to other organizations such as social services agencies, community-based orgs, for individual level care coordination and case management. So it's doing a number of things. It's also replacing standards, changing the standards for disclosing information to family and caregivers by changing it from the professional judgment standard to good faith belief. And so kind of giving covered entities a little bit more leeway when it comes to disclosing PHI such that it removes some of the more stringent standards.
Thanks, Maya. So Sarah, as we close the discussion here, what do you think is the biggest takeaway for stakeholders regarding these proposed changes to the privacy rule, which seems significant?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is simple. It's that these changes are intended to make privacy compliance easier for providers and also intended to help patients to be more engaged in their own healthcare. And to the extent that the privacy rule edits changes do that, I think they're going to be well received.
Yeah, it sounds like these proposed HIPAA updates could really meaningfully reshape compliance expectations, as well as, day-to-day operations for both covered entities and business associates. Thanks to you both for your insights here, and we will continue to monitor further developments. In the meantime, if you have questions about HIPAA compliance, please contact Sarah, Maya, or your current K&L Gates attorney. We'll be back soon with another episode of Triage. Thanks to our listeners for continuing to engage with this podcast. Thanks again.
Thanks again for listening to Triage, timely conversations for healthcare professionals. New episodes are available for download through Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. By subscribing to Triage, you will receive timely notifications for each new episode. Also, if you have any topics you would like to hear discussed on Triage, please don't hesitate to email triagesupport@klgates.com. We would love to hear from you.